Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News. Please remember to like the video and to make sure that you are still subscribed. And I want to show you my whole desktop. No, I didn't want to do that. I want to read this article. I actually found this article on Facebook. Rare place to find things about climate change. Not that many people are talking about it on Facebook, except for in the forums. I mean, I'm a member of a bunch of forums and groups that are talking about climate change, but as far as like my timeline, I don't know. It's a mixed bag. Anyways, there's a lot of just like, whatever, regular people who have varying degrees of the understanding of climate change in my timeline or in my friends group. And there's just not a lot of talk about climate change. When you do talk about it, it doesn't really go very far. And then invariably some goofball jumps into the conversation talking about it's plant food or CO2 is plant. Oh, climate's always changing. Yeah. Anyways. So this article, I'm going to read, had some mixed emotions about this article, but I'm just going to read it for you because it's interesting anyways. From November 20th, 2019 by Kevin Casey from globalcomment.com. Why climate change is an irrelevance, economic growth is a myth, and sustainability is 40 years too late. I take issue just with the headline because climate change is not an irrelevance. Period. Climate change is a set of forces they're in motion right now. Climate change is happening and is going to, bring us a lot of grief or pain if we don't, whether we deal with it or not. And so it is not an irrelevance. We're going to really have to accept and consider its position in our lives. As someone who has been exploring the world's most isolated wilderness regions for nearly half a century, I have some insight into the state of the planet and the human race's current environmental befuddlement. I've watched the condition of the earth plummet before my eyes within my own lifespan to the extent that I no longer recognize it as the beautiful, diverse supporter of life it once was. So let me start by addressing a few key points of confusion that seem to affect both keen activists and head-in-the-sand deniers in equal measure. Climate change is not the biggest threat to the world's environment. We are. The world's rivers and seas aren't choked with floating piles of rubbish, toxic chemicals, and plastic waste because of climate change. They're that way because we have 7.7 billion people crammed onto a planet that's dying under the pressure of our greedy, selfish abuse. 2 decades from now, the Earth's oceans are on target to contain more plastic in them by weight than fish. Climate change didn't do that. Way too many people did that. Climate change hasn't covered the world with concrete or replaced healthy ecosystems with canal estates and shopping malls. We and our ever-increasing numbers are the culprit. Climate change is only one of many symptoms of an out-of-control disease, human overpopulation. The irreversible environmental damage stemming from having too many people on a finite planet is already painfully evident. Our bloated population is diminishing our children's futures in ways that have very little to do with the planet's temperature. I keep hearing people say humans have always found a way to solve difficult problems, so don't worry, it'll work itself out. Alas, the problem the Earth faces now is one it has never dealt with before, a plague of nearly 8 billion humans. It can't cope anymore. We've been so distracted, making money, embracing our agendas, and spreading myths about growth and progress that we forget to notice we've turned our only viable planetary home into a spherical garbage dump. It's just going to keep happening. Humans may be impressively intelligent, but they're also profoundly self-focused and short-sighted. No politician talks about our population epidemic. True. All you hear from them is jobs, jobs, and more growth. You don't hear climate change activists talking about overpopulation either. It's too dangerous a subject, too painful a reality. It permanently occupies the too hard basket. Instead, we've all jumped on the climate warming bandwagon. We stridently blame governments for lack of action on climate change, while secretly hoping that whatever they decide to do doesn't adversely affect our consumer lifestyle. Let's not confuse activism with action. They're not the same. One is about social inclusion and feeling good about your outrage. The other is about doing something tangible to make things better. I hate to burst this old school bubble, but there's no longer such a thing as economic growth, not in this century. There's no true sustainability either, not anymore. The environmental tipping point everyone loves to talk about was actually reached around 1980 when science tells us that humanity began to consume more of the Earth's resources than the planet could possibly regenerate. We've gobbled up more of our planet's resources in the past 50 years than in all previous human history combined and polluted our way to prosperity in the process. Climate change had nothing to do with any of that and still doesn't. Economic growth needs population growth to sustain itself. That's key. But when a depleted planet can no longer carry the burden of an existing population and its endless demands, growth is nothing but a dangerous illusion. Today's healthy economy is tomorrow's dystopian misery. In this century, what we still mistakenly call economic growth is environmental destruction. Pure and simple. Nothing we do today can be called sustainable on a planet that has already endured 4 solid decades of irreplaceable resource use. The 1970s were the last sustainable decade for mankind. Unfortunately, at that time, no one took notice that a tipping point had been reached and passed. Our current environmental woes have almost nothing to do with climate and everything to do with how we've been treating the Earth, not just recently, but for many centuries. We've always abused the Earth horribly and managed to get away with it because our numbers weren't significant enough to cause lasting damage. Now our numbers are out of control, and that presents us with limited options. In hindsight, we should have addressed rampant overpopulation shortly after World War II when the global population was still around 2.5 billion, less than a third of what it is today. But we're in the midst of jubilant post-war optimism and still believed in the delusion of nature's endless bounty. If you could go back in time to around 1604 to where to the spot where Manhattan now sits, you would see a tiny settlement of about 150 people enjoying a pristine coastal wilderness with superb growing soil, ample wildlife, and rich timber forests, a genuine paradise on Earth. Back then, whales would wander up the clean, fish-rich Hudson River, and you could pull lobsters out of the sea half as long as a man. Huge flocks of passenger pigeons blackened the sky. Today, that same place is wall-to-wall concrete, with one of the highest human population densities on Earth. We've been so busy improving things that we've destroyed practically everything. In the end, our legacy as a species won't be about all the wonderful things we've created while we occupied the Earth. It will be all about all the wonderful things we've destroyed. The most astounding explosion of human population in history happened on my generation's watch, so we need to take ownership of that lack of foresight. Our own children are now paying the price for our blunders and have every right to be worried about the Earth's future and theirs. But let's not heap all the blame on baby boomers. Previous generations helped the planet's degradation along just as blindly, and today's young people still expect the sort of prosperous lifestyle that a dying planet can now only provide in the very short term. So I would patiently urge all climate change activists to direct their environmental concerns at those who really deserve it. They can start with the economists, developers, and politicians who blissfully believe that status quo of perpetual growth still works. They can then move on to the religious zealots who still spout the mantra of man's dominion over nature and abhor the idea of contraceptives. After that, they can apportion a hefty dose of blame to the world leaders who purposefully sidestep the overpopulation issue like the political hot potato it is, despite the fact that it's killing our planet and robbing future generations of the spectacular biodiversity and viable ecosystems that older generations took for granted. And finally, They can look in the mirror and ask themselves what they are personally doing besides protesting in the streets to make their planet a better place for all the life that dwells on it. What are the solutions to an overcrowded planet? Firstly, to stop getting sidetracked by the climate change industry. Climate change industry, what? And recognize that the problem is our sheer numbers and blatant disregard for the planet's health, not the climate. We must replace political and economic agendas and warped ideologies with better education, especially in science. We need more global promotion of family planning, more female empowerment, and government incentives to have fewer children, not more. Sadly, we should have been proactive about all this stuff at least 60 years ago instead of just waking up to our self-inflicted predicament now. While it's reassuring that today's young people are increasingly aware of our seriousness of their environmental plight, they are protesting up the wrong tree. They should direct their passionate attention to the real enemy, a greedy, arrogant, two-legged species that's in furious denial and has become far too adept at making excuses for the inexcusable. So there is that. I just wanted to read that for you. I have mixed feelings about that. I don't know how you all feel about that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure what he's saying about forgetting about climate change, because climate change is a reality. And yes, it's a reality brought on by too many people, but we have too many people because we are developing all these technologies that help us, have too many people or live longer or whatever. Of course, it's first world countries, especially the United States, who use more resources than any other country per capita. So, I am a believer in the conversation around overpopulation. I think it's an important one that we should have. We should also be talking about how we're going to live with less on this planet. And if we lived with less, would that bring about less people? A lot of what our industry is all centered around is not just making us comfortable, but making us, shielding us from nature, from nature's balancing act, if you will. And that extends, all over the world globally. But of course, lifespans and healthcare and people being shielded from nature's balancing act, don't happen as robustly, I guess, as they do in first world countries. So it is a complicated conversation. When we talk about overpopulation, I think it's a difficult conversation, but it's one we really need to have. And I think we need to do our very, very best to have that conversation. What would a fair and compassionate plan around overpopulation look like? What would a fair and compassionate way forward, what would that look like in regards to human beings using so many resources on the planet? It's a huge, wide open area of conversation and hopefully action in the near future. But let me know what your thoughts are around this. I mean, like climate change, like the issue of climate change and environmental destruction, there are so many aspects to it. There are so many different things that we need to look at at the same time if we're going to do anything about the cliff that we're about to go over. That quite a few things need to be looked at the same time. We should be looking at overpopulation, and we need to be dealing with climate change. Climate change is definitely not an irrelevance. It is a big, scary, ugly monster, and it's heading our way. So, stay focused on that. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.